So we're joined today by Isaac Morehouse, who is the founder of Praxis and Crash, both Praxis being an alternative to college and an apprenticeship program that we'll hear more about, and Crash being an organization dedicated to helping young people and people in general, I suppose, at this point, launch their careers. And the reason we're bringing Isaac on today is because he's a fascinating man who is essentially disrupting two industries, or at least this is the way that I see it. Education in the sense of creating this alternative to college that is really, in my view, a marvelous tool and a marvelous opportunity for young people. And then Crash, which appears to be just taking off, but I know less about Crash than I do about Praxis. So we'll find out more about that as we go too. Welcome, Isaac. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be here, Craig. I appreciate it.
So I just love what I've been watching you do over the years. I sort of watch from a distance, although I'm a little bit more engaged now. My daughter Darcy just was accepted to the January cohort for Praxis or at Praxis. So I've gotten a little bit more engaged on what's going on over there, and I just love what I'm seeing. But just to watch you produce that marvelous organization and watch that grow and watch the number of people who have benefited from going through that. By the way, at OSI, we've hired two Praxians already. Lisa Hart works with us, and now Yitzhak Young works with us. So we're reaping the benefits directly of what you've done over there. And then to watch you also create this career launch platform that is apparently really taking off and helping people to learn how it is that you create value in the marketplace and make it known that you can do that, which is a huge missing link. And it's not obvious that this is a missing link. So would you tell us a little bit about how you discovered this gap between what businesses need and what young people are coming to the marketplace with, and how that got you into these two businesses?
Yeah, it's funny. This gap is like hiding in plain sight, and it has been for quite a while. There's this weird thing that happens with kind of cultural norms and dominant beliefs and traditions where they emerge for a reason because there's some truth to them. And then the truth to them starts to fade away, but the belief persists for a really long time. And despite the very obvious evidence to the contrary. And so this has been the case for, I would argue, at least 20 years with universities. Going and getting a college degree is like this religious belief, and everybody has assumed that that's going to give you a good job and you can't get a good job without it. And that hasn't been the case. It's decreasingly the case for quite a long time. And the evidence is so crazy. Like, you talk to businesses, and this is how this started about a decade ago. I was talking to all of these entrepreneurs and business owners for a previous job, and they're all telling me the same thing. No, there's no good talent. I can't find anybody worth hiring. They're all sending me their resumes. They all come out of colleges and they don't know anything. They're just not ready to create value. And they're like 23, 25. They've got a whole bunch of debt. And this was in the middle of, a downturn shortly after the 2008 crash. And all these college students were telling me the opposite. Nobody's hiring. There's no jobs out there. And companies were like, no, I'm always hiring. I just can't find good people. And, I've got all this debt. There's nothing I can do. I guess I'll go get a master's just so I can defer making student loan payments. Like, I don't have any reason to do it. I got to go take on more debt to defer my debt. And so I was observing this and just thinking, this is absolutely insane that young people are spending, it's on average 5 years now to get a 4-year degree, 5.5, I think. They're spending half a decade doing what? I'm not really sure, in order to come out and really be just as unemployable as they went in. I mean, the only thing that's more employable is that they're a little bit older and more like mature. That's about it. They're not gaining any skills that are more valuable than they went in. And even the knowledge that they're supposed to gain, which is irrelevant to the workplace, almost all of it. You can see all these, studies done where people go into college and they test on their knowledge of a variety of subjects. And then 4 years later, their knowledge is usually the same or slightly worse. So like even the subjects they're supposed to learn, they're not learning. So observing that, I just asked myself, like, what if you just created this from scratch today? Instead of just assuming that this old thing, this college idea that's just sort of grown to be the norm was necessary, what if you just said, what is necessary? And I started asking employers, I started interviewing them. What would it take for you to bring on a truly entry level person? Let's say they're 18, 19. What would you need them to have? How much would you be willing to pay them? What kind of grace period would you give them to learn on the job? And I started finding really interesting things. The things that companies needed to see were not out of reach. They didn't need any kind of genius. They didn't need 3 years of experience in the industry. They certainly didn't need a degree. They were like, well, someone that's always on time, great email communications, is willing to figure things out on their own and doesn't ask for help all the time. Like really basic things that are not that hard for somebody to obtain. And so I had this idea to say, let's try to get people from, not employable basically at like a professional type job to totally employable in the shortest amount of time possible. And I don't think you can do that without a work experience component of some kind to really get somebody leveled up. And so I thought, if we can have 6 months to prep you on the basics, and then 6 months on the job learning where we're supporting you so that the employers don't have the burden of a really, really new employee that needs to be taught everything. We're doing some additional support, and you're really low cost to that company. For 6 months, you're paying them like $15 an hour. It's not a lot of money for most companies to take a chance on somebody. At the end of that year, I felt like there is no way possible that these people are not going to be more employable than people coming out of college. Like the bar is so low. I just felt like I can't envision any world in which they're not more valuable on the marketplace. And I went and launched Praxis, and that turned out to be true. The post-graduation employment rate for Praxis is mid 90, like 93, 95%. It hovers around there. And that's immediately out of the program, by the way. When colleges tell you their graduation, they give themselves like a 6-month buffer. With college, like only half the people finish. And of those, only 40% get jobs that require a degree. And of those, like most of those are not getting those jobs for, like, you just can't even compare. Like the outcomes have been tremendous. So, that was really that first, like recognizing that gap between what employers want and what students are coming onto the marketplace with. And I'll say one more thing. I know I've rambled. The most important thing about that gap to me is the perception gap. And this is what I've really worked hard to educate students and their parents about, because it's not just the gap in between the skills that students have and the skills companies want. It's the gap between what companies perceive students to be and what the students perceive themselves to be. And so there's some really interesting research. You ask companies on a whole range of areas: communication skills, teamwork, technical know-how, ability to use even normal tools that millennials and Gen Z are supposed to be good at, Google and whatever. They're reporting across the board somewhere like they think the workforce is about 20 to 25% prepared on those things. You ask students, how prepared are you to enter the workforce in these same areas? It's the complete opposite. 75 to 80% of them think that they're prepared. And so they come out totally not ready to add value to a company, but believing that they are valued by a company, which is why they're all angry and bitter and asking for their tuition to be forgiven and whatever. They've been duped, more or less.
You have a marvelous analogy that I've heard you use, and I know you like analogies and you like mixing analogies, so maybe we can do some more of that. But you have this analogy where you talk about kids being on a train when they're going through college, and then the train comes to a stop and they get off the train and they're like, where are the jobs? And then you say, well, the jobs are out in space, actually, and you're here on Earth getting off this train. How are you going to get to outer space? And I thought that was a beautiful way. Can you riff on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I definitely think in sort of pictures and metaphors. Usually while I'm on a walk, I'll get some idea and I'll be like, this is the greatest analogy ever. They don't always land with people, but no,
That was
get
beautiful
excited
though.
about them. So yeah, and this is really, Crash as a career launch platform, which is kind of an outgrowth of the work we've done with Praxis over the years, just one small component of it, is when I really started thinking about this at the same time that we started Crash. That when you think about careers, the metaphor, careers are out in space. They're out, all over outer space, and you can chart a course in any direction. And it's this expanse, and there's careers to be had out there. Really exciting. When you think about the education system, it really is like a train. And you can have a crappy train that's slow. You can have a really fast train. You can have a fancy train, expensive. But at the end of the day, you get off the train and you're still on the ground. You're still on earth. You're no closer to those careers. You just zigzag across this ball and you can get prestige points for riding a really nice train, but the careers are still out in space. And so I sort of see it as like a 3-phase process of getting from where you are into that first career. Because once you have your first sort of career job or like professional job, everything else is so much easier, right? Like once you break orbit in the Earth's atmosphere, it's much easier to navigate out there. There's no friction. It's much easier to everything. It's a whole different game. It's really just bridging that gap, that first job that takes a monumentous effort, just like getting something out into orbit. And so the 3 phases I kind of see of getting from here to there are discover, build, and launch. And so discover is essentially finding a trajectory. And you don't have to know where you're going to be forever. You just have to pick what's the right trajectory to get me into orbit. So I got to just sort of aim in a general direction. And really what you got to know is what not to do, where not to head. Hey, I don't want to head there, right? I'm going to collide with an asteroid or whatever. The metaphor might get a little complicated if I go too far with it. But mapping that flight course is really just about knowing yourself, your interests and abilities, and knowing what's out there in the market. What do people value, that you can do, or at least that you're not terrible at and that you don't hate. And so that process, and then build, is essentially building the craft that will get you there. And that is a combination of skills and the ability to prove those skills. That's really, really key. That those 2 things that you have to have, the value creation potential and the way to signal that potential. And I think that's where a lot of people just rely on kind of a resume and some bullet points like I volunteered, I got a degree, here's my GPA. Those are, for one thing, those rarely build actual skills, but they're not a good signal. They don't tell me very much about you at all, like BA in communications. I don't know what that means. Are you trying to tell me you're a good communicator? Why don't you just send me a 2-minute video clip of you communicating? That's going to be a much better signal, right? And so that kind of component of building this thing that's got to get you to that first opportunity. That's really, Crash is really focused on that, trying to help you create something that's more impressive than a resume or trying to lean on a third-party credential. And then launch is just taking that first experience and using that to leverage your way in. And so that could be an internship, that could be a project, that could be offering to do a little bit of work for free or job shadow for someone or apprentice. Anything that lets you go beyond, because a lot of people think I'm going to go from zero experience at all to getting hired at a full-time salaried position. That's rarely the case. That experience component, you have to get your hands dirty. And again, that can be a project. So if you say, oh, I want to come on, Craig, I want you to hire me as your podcast editor. And you say, well, what's your experience? Well, nothing. I've studied podcast editing. I would, if I were you, and I'm sure you would, have you edited any podcasts? Do you have a podcast of your own? Have you started one? Have you done anything tangible? So even if it's a project or a hobby, or have you been an intern at a podcast production studio, getting some kind of experience to get your way into a real job. I think those are sort of the three components of getting into orbit. But I think it's important to have that frame that like, hey, I can do whatever education stuff I want, but that's not closing the gap between me and someone paying me money,
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, that metaphor is helpful and those categories are helpful. So John, I know you've got some questions. You read some of Isaac's books recently, so.
Hell yeah, great books, by the way. I love your writing. It's just so clean and clear and to the point. What about this idea, though, that these kids, they're coming out of high school and they're supposed to find a passion and they go pursue that? It seems like Praxis is a good landing spot if, you're just trying to get a job. But speak to that idea that, what you're supposed to do is figure out what you're passionate about and pursue that for the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And that's really like the question that I've wrestled with the most personally in my life, starting from a very young age. I've always wanted to be very engaged mentally, emotionally with the work that I'm doing. I've never been someone who's really liked the kind of work-life dichotomy. Like I want the things I care most about in life to also be where I earn my money, if to the impossible. And there's two ways to achieve that. One is to find more and more things meaningful, so that you don't just feel like you're laying bricks, but you're building a cathedral, to change your perspective. And the other is to change the activities you do, to go and do the activities that you already view as meaningful. And I think both of those are necessary, because you'll always be, you'll always feel like you're not doing something cool enough if you're not willing to see how one thing leads to another and the value that even seemingly mundane things do. But in my own process of trying to figure that out, I discovered pretty early on that was too difficult a question for me to answer. Like, what are you passionate about? What's your calling? And I'm like, I don't know. There was nothing that was obvious, right? I was not a very mechanically minded person who was like, oh, I'm into the sciences. I was not like, oh, I want to be a doctor. The closest thing when I was in my early teens was like, I wanted to be a professional baseball player. And it was pretty clear pretty quickly that wasn't in the cards for me. So other than that, I didn't have like anything that seemed obvious, and it felt like a tremendous amount of pressure. And I'm a very kind of rebellious person by nature. And so even like rebelling against sort of myself, so to speak, because there wasn't people in my life that were telling me you must find your passion, but I felt this pressure. I don't know where I got it, but I felt it. And at one point I was like, okay, screw that. I don't need to do that. It's my life. I just have to not do things that I hate doing. As long as I'm not doing things that I hate doing, I'm not going to end up trapped. I'm not going to end up in prison. And everything else is exploration. And I'm going to eventually figure out and discover things that I love. And I'm going to eventually find some kind of passion or several passions. And those might change over time. And so it was this immensely freeing moment to kind of realize, and I don't know that it was a single moment, but over time, that I don't need to find my passion. So instead, I just gave myself this challenge. Don't do stuff you hate. And I let that guide me. Like, I just try really, really hard to not do anything that I hated. But I was very, very generous about not assuming that I hated something until I'd tried it. Because that's really, really important. I think when you're young, you can assume, oh my God, like I find this with sales. If you say to any young people, do you want to work in sales? They'll all say, that sounds terrible. They all assume they hate it. And they don't really know what a sales job is. They're thinking of like a used car salesman. And there's so many different things. They all assume that they want to work in marketing, on the other hand, which again, they don't know anything about marketing. There's so many different kinds of marketing. And so without making any assumptions, trying to let experience be my guide to say, okay, I don't get to say I hate something unless I have really clear firsthand knowledge, or it's pretty obvious. Like, I don't have to have firsthand knowledge of being an accountant to know that I would hate it, because I've done enough of that kind of thing and I'm familiar with it, right? So I let that be my guide. And what I found is that saying yes to everything that I didn't clearly hate, it just led me down this amazing path of really interesting things. I just sort of followed interestingness and being open to opportunities, but was very, very rigorous about the minute I started to hate something and it started to kind of suck my soul, even if it paid really well, even if it was really cushy and it was an easy job, even if people respected me for it, I had to quit. The sooner the better, because the more cushy and respectable the job that you hate, the harder it is to get out. The every day you go longer, it's harder and harder to get out. And there are so many people that are doing things that they hate because it's really hard to escape. In fact, I would argue it's much, much easier to live a life that you don't like than it is to live a life that you like, because making that break, and you'll be shocked. You have to be really honest with yourself. Like, you may tell yourself a story, like take with baseball. Say I had been talented enough to play baseball. It's very possible, and I think this is likely in most cases, that I start going down that road, and I realize somewhere along the line, I actually don't like playing baseball for a living. But now I've invested in it, my brand, my reputation, everybody's assumptions about me. You're the professional baser. They're all proud of me. They're all living vicariously through me. I'm making good money. I feel like I can't escape that. And I think that's a really dangerous thing to try to avoid. Like, once you know something is not doing it for you, get out as soon as possible. And so when I took that approach, it just like changed everything. And I've kind of followed it to this day. And it's been very difficult at times. And I've added a little bit of nuance to it, or a little bit of additional layers to it for people early in their career. I say, look, if you don't want to try to find your passion, which I think is usually a little bit of a foolhardy mission. Some people really know right away, but don't do stuff you hate. Don't do stuff you suck at, and do stuff that people value, that they're willing to pay you for. And at that intersection, everything's fair game. And you'll add to the list of things you hate and things you suck at. And that field of what's available will narrow down. And now, like, I have a fairly narrow range of things that I know are absolutely in my sweet spot, and a very large range of things that I've learned over the years I don't like doing and I'm not going to do.
Yeah. There's a paralysis, I think, that a lot of kids can find themselves stuck in if they feel like I've got to find my passion before I really, dive into something full force. So they wind up in something that just pays the bills that they do hate, right? They just don't like doing it, but they're not willing to go do something else because they don't have their passion yet. And I think there's an interesting link here to another thing that you guys focus on both at Praxis and at Crash, and at least indirectly you do, and that is the idea of overcoming perfectionism, right? This, like, I'm not going to launch the product until it's perfect, or I'm not going to send in, my video to this company for their feedback until it's perfect. And you can't function that way if you're not willing to sort of, and one of the ways you guys talk about this is learn out loud. And I know one of the things that you advocate of your, I assume you advocated over at Crash to some extent, but I know at Praxis you did when you were working with them, is blogging every day, right? So that you learn how to ship imperfect products. So you get into the groove of, this is the way the world actually works, right? Nobody produces something perfect and then does it, and nobody finds but maybe not nobody, but almost nobody has their passion all figured out, and then they just start from A and go to Z because they knew that was their passion. That's not the way it works. It's much more of a meandering, try and see, figure out, learn as you go kind of thing. So could you say a little bit about the connection between this idea of knowing your passion sort of in advance and going after it, and how people might overcome perfectionism?
Yeah, it's so important to let the world be a part of your learning process, to get feedback from the world as quickly as possible, right? And this is like the fundamental thing about entrepreneurship or businesses in a free market anyway, that the reason that the market produces such amazing things is not because each individual business owner just comes in with brilliant ideas and knows how to make your life better. It's that there's a process whereby they lose money if they're not pleasing you, and they make money if they do, and they accidentally stumble through over many, many iterations these amazing products. And it's the same in your individual life. You're not going to just suddenly emerge with beautiful works of art or pieces of writing or creations for the world after you've studied in your cave. You're going to learn almost in some accidental ways by just trying, by dabbling, by experimenting over and over and over again. And that's going to help guide you. You're going to bump into some things and say, oh, I don't want to go that direction again. I'm going to go this direction. And that process of open learning is a real challenge for people, especially the way that the education system is structured. Most people's experience of school or education is this very hidden. It's all behind closed doors. You're in a very tight cohort of people your same age. And most of the things you're doing quietly, secretly, studying, writing drafts of papers, whatever, and then only giving them to one person who will never show it to anyone else, one teacher. And then they'll privately give it back to you and tell you if it was good or bad in like this binary way. Or maybe they'll say really good or kind of bad, but it's pretty much a binary pass fail. And it's all it's like preparation mode, right? I mean, even the physical of school itself, it's like hiding from the world behind barbed wires sometimes in these little cells, and like spending 10 years preparing to go out and now be in the world among sort of the real world and not sheltered from its feedback anymore. And that, I think, is a very damaging mindset. So people get stuck in that. And I mean, how many people do you know that are like, oh, I'm working on a book, or I want to start a podcast? Like the number of people, if I had $1 for everybody that's emailed me and said, I'm thinking about starting a podcast, and they never did, I'd be a rich man, right? They're like, so everybody is thinking about, they're preparing, they're researching, and they'll come up with all kinds of things. I'm about to start a podcast, but I've been researching for a couple of days, what's the best microphone? And I'm like, that's not your problem right now. Or I'm going to start a company, but I can't decide like what the logo should be or what the, should I register it as an LLC? I'm like, go get a customer first and we're solve those things later, record 10 episodes and then be like, hey, I really like this and I'm good at it. Maybe I should upgrade my sound equipment. Like start getting it out into the world. That's how you get better. And so for me, the simplest starting point, this is why we've pushed really hard on this at Praxis, and we have a 30-day blogging challenge that's built into the curriculum. Not because blogging is like inherently some morally superior thing to do. It's such a low bar that anyone can do it. You don't have to have any particular level of skill or technical savvy. Anybody can spin up a blog. And it's one of those things that if you do it every day for 30 days and click publish so that the world can see it. Now, the world isn't going to see it because they're not going to come to your blog for no reason, most likely. But the possibility that they can, that it's out there, it's in the public realm. What that does to you, well, how that transforms you, it's not that it's going to get you readership and build you an audience and get you a job, although those occasionally do happen. It's that it's going to transform you, the writer, being forced to do that. So on several levels, one is doing anything, a commitment you make and sticking to it every single day is a really challenging thing that very few people do. I mean, if you said, I'm going to do 10 push-ups or 2 push-ups every single day for 30 days, I'm willing to bet that you're not going to do it. You're going to miss a day or two. You're going to forget something. Like, it doesn't matter how small the task, just that consistency is a really hard thing. So being consistent alone, but forcing yourself to translate your thoughts into writing and overcome your fear of the world seeing your imperfection is like a superpower. Once you unlock that and you learn to hit publish and not care that it might be embarrassing or inaccurate or people might not like it, what will the world think? It's like all that burden just goes away and it just unlocks this superpower. And so it's very personal for me because that's really how Praxis began. I was working at a job that I actually loved, but I was feeling restless. And there was no rational reason that I should feel restless. The rational mind was like, everything about your job makes sense. But somewhere in my gut, I knew I needed something more. I was getting this itch. And my friend TK Coleman challenged me. He said, you need some creativity in your life. Why don't you commit to blog every day for 6 months? And he challenged me to do that. And he had been doing it. And I was like, well, I'm not going to let him one-up me. All right, fine, I'll do it. And I'm like, I don't have anything to say, like everybody else. I've been like, someday I'll write a book maybe. I kind of like writing, but someday. It was all someday. I took up the challenge and it didn't take long. It was probably 3 months in. Like the floodgates just opened, like creativity, forcing myself to publish every day. It like unlocked the part of my brain that's more creative because I had to think of something to say. And I just started getting floods of ideas all the time. I had this whole folder of all these business ideas and everything. And it was out of that. It was about 3 or 4 months in that the idea of Praxis came out. And I don't think that would have happened if I was I don't know what I want to do. I'm not totally satisfied at this job. I need to wait until I have some really brilliant idea to like act on it or talk to anyone. The fact that I was forced to start a blog with no particular idea what I was going to say and start cranking it out, it just like unlocked something. And I think that's a really cool way to tap into kind of your inner creative power. And then the added benefit is over time, you build a body of work. And now you've started, you get better at it. But you build a body of work and now you have something tangible that can demonstrate your thoughts, your skills, your abilities. If it's videos, graphic design, blogging, just creating publicly and consistently. I've hired people for no other reason than that I noticed them creating on a regular basis and I watched them get better over time at what they were doing. And I'm like, this is a relentless learner who improves every day. If they're on my team, they're going to improve my company every day. I want this person on board,
Yeah, that's really interesting. We hire on the same basis. In fact, we hired Lisa Hart because I saw her producing really impressive values out in the marketplace, and we went after her and said, well, we need her on our team. So I know how that goes. It's an interesting thing about writing and writing regularly. Writing is thinking, right? I mean, it's sort of the most organized form of thinking. And so I think when you give yourself the standing order to write every day, what you're doing is you're parking a certain amount of time every day where you actually are actively thinking about something rather than just passively letting your mind go where it may. So I think there's a direct link to that that process that you guys use and that helped you to launch Praxis and no doubt Crash. And I want to talk about Crash here a little bit too. But give me a sec on that. But there's this link between that writing process and the fact that what it really is doing is making you think. You're making yourself think by doing that in ways that you otherwise simply wouldn't. And then you get the feedback that you wouldn't get if you weren't doing that, right? So that the doing it out loud in public helps you to get feedback and engage with other people and show people what you're doing. So there's multiple levels of value in doing this.
Yeah, it changes the way you see the world too, especially, we've got access to so much information now and a constant stream of interesting stuff, some of it silly, some of it infuriating, some of it great through social media and whatever. And I'm not at all like an anti-technology guy. I think that stuff's great, but a constant stream of things to consume can really deaden your creative capacity if you're not careful. And so, and being a consumer, it's very comfortable. It's very easy because you get to be a critic. You get to kind of sit back with your arms crossed and say, yeah, that article was okay. Yeah, that movie was okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you realize when you start putting stuff out there yourself, it changes the way you see everything. You start to be a lot more optimistic, and you start to be a lot more appreciative of other creators. Even if their stuff isn't great, you're like, hey, good for him. He's putting it out there. Like, I know how hard that is. I've been there, right? It's like once you've been a creator yourself, you just have this respect for other people who do it, even if you don't like what they put out. And it changes you from just being a critic all the time to really seeing more possibility and opportunity in the world. And on the body of work part, I'll just give you one quick example that I think people miss this. Opportunities, there's a huge degree of, I don't want to call it luck because it's not just like you sit there and something good happens to you, but it's like things that you didn't expect, opportunities that you didn't expect are all over the place. And it's kind of like, they're falling down like rain. And the larger your surface area, the more of those can hit you and the more likely you are to get one that's really great. And so it's like increasing your luck surface area. And one way to do that is to let it be known what you're interested in. And so I remember talking to somebody in Praxis years ago who said he's really passionate about personal finance and financial literacy, helping people understand it and be better at managing finances. And I went and Googled him for like 5 minutes. And I said, man, I don't see a thing about that. I said, I see a couple pictures of you with your family, something about race cars, and a tweet about music. And I said, tell me some of the books you've read. He'd read a whole bunch of them. I said, I didn't see any Amazon book reviews from you. I didn't see any blog posts. I didn't see any tweets. I didn't see any Facebook posts mentioning any of this stuff. And I told him, I said, it's not like you're going to build a brand and an audience at your age as a financial guru because you're posting on Twitter. But if I know you're in Praxis, I follow you on social media, and I never knew this about you. People come to me all the time and say, hey, I'm looking for an intern to do this or to do that or to do whatever. And what do? The first person that comes to mind, I send their way. And I said, I know a lot of people in the financial services industry. If somebody came to me today or yesterday before you told me this and said, hey, I'm writing a book on financial literacy. I'm looking for somebody to help me edit it. Do you have anybody that you know? I wouldn't even know that would be like a dream opportunity for you because you're never talking about it. Like, the world needs to know these interests in order for opportunities to come your way. You will attract like-minded people into your orbit if you're just loud about your interests and your learnings. And if you're like, hey, I just read this book on financial literacy, 3 things I loved about it, 3 things I didn't. If you're doing that consistently, people will be like, oh, he's the guy that loves that stuff. You know what? My buddy just said he's going to work for Dave Ramsey. I'm going to ask him if he wants to connect and bring him on his podcast, whatever, right? Like, there's so much opportunity if you just learn to share out loud.
I think tied into this unwillingness to learn out loud is a certain fear of failure. Wondering what your thoughts on failure and its values are.
Yeah, I feel like that's almost like too easy of one because it's, luckily, I like this. It's become really popular to be like fail forward, failure is good and whatever. And I think that's a great thing. I think that's a necessary reaction to a culture where there's a very high degree of fear of failure. And again, I think some of the things I mentioned with school before, where you're in this binary system that's kind of a pass or fail, which is not at all how the real world works. It's not how Edison invented the light bulb or whatever, right? It's like, it's dirty, it's messy, it's experimental. So I think you do need to overcome that. But I don't think you need to like glorify failure. Like there's a reason we don't want to fail. Failure sucks. It's brutal. But understanding the difference between suffering with meaning, things that are difficult, but they're moving you towards something that's better. They're making you a better person, a superior version of yourself, and just suffering for its own sake. So there's nothing like inherently good about failing and, not succeeding at something. But the benefits of failing when you're trying to do something that you care about are tremendous, right? And I think using that, it's actually a good test for yourself because it's really easy to bullshit yourself and say, oh, I really want to do this. I really want to do that. And if you ask yourself, am I willing to fail at that? And if the answer is yes, then you should probably pursue it. If the answer is no, right? Like, oh, I have a business idea. It's this, and this, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Are you willing to go all in on that, completely fail? Will you have regretted that you tried it? And if the answer is no, I would rather try it and fail than never try it at all, then you should do it. I think that can be a good test for yourself. But yeah, in general, especially when you're young, I mean, let's get real. When we're talking about failure for a young person, certainly in the United States today, where are they falling to? The bottom is so like the safety net is so large. What is failure? What's the worst that can happen? If you're 22 and you don't have a job or you make a couple bucks and you live in an apartment, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? Like you live with your mom for a couple months or you go work at Sub couple months while you try to the bottom is so high. You don't fall that far in this country. There's tremendous wealth and opportunity, especially when you're young. The cost of failure is actually very low. It's pretty much all in your head. I mean, it really is for most people. The cost of failure is pretty much people will think less of me. And that's a really damaging thing. You don't want to do anything for people's good opinion. You really don't. Doesn't mean you go out of your way to try to be a jerk and offend people. Of course not. Your reputation matters. But being afraid of failure because of what people will think of you, that is a really dangerous place to be. You can make prudent decisions. Oh, if I fail here, I'll be out of money and I don't want that, blah, blah, blah. But if it's like, and when you get down to it, if you really question people, well, I'm just really scared if I do this and it doesn't work. What if I launch this Kickstarter campaign and I don't hit the goal to raise the money to create this thing I want to make? Okay, what happens then? Well, I don't know. I will have put a lot of time into it. Yeah, but you will have put time into learning something interesting. Yeah, but ultimately it's just that it's embarrassing. And I think that's what needs to be overcome.
Yeah, and embracing the opportunities that failure provides. Because the thing, obviously, success is better than failure. But failure is a part of everybody's process. And the question is, what do you do when you fail? If you use failure as a pivot point to say, oh, well, that didn't work, and then you iterate and try something else, then you're constantly ratcheting up. And I know you've been doing this very thing over at Crash. So I'd like to hear a little bit about what the iterative process has been over there. Every once in a while, I see some kind of a report from you, and I remember reading your newsletter that you did for a little while, the Inner Game of Startups, where you were talking about the things you would try at Crash, and you'd find, well, this didn't work, so now we're going this way. And each of those instances where you guys tried something and it didn't work, well, that's failure. We tried, that didn't work. So then you pivot and you try something else. Tell us a little bit about how you've developed Crash from its inception on up to where you are now. What were the big pivot points?
Oh man, it's a wild journey. And this is what's really cool about startups, especially software startups that are, early stage. You can move and change so fast, and that can drive you crazy, and it's a big challenge. But it's cool because you learn really fast. You can learn things so quickly. So just take a simple example. Say you've got some, small online tool that you're trying to offer. You can figure out whether it's better to, give away the tool for free and then have a premium upgrade or charge up front in a week for almost no cost. You spin up 2 landing pages that are identical, except for one charges up front and one doesn't. And you go out and put them out in front of, an audience, throw a couple bucks behind them if you need to. You probably won't need to. And you can see really quickly. Now, of course, these experiments are, they vary in their accuracy and stuff, but you get that feedback can come so quickly that you really have the opportunity to adapt and learn. And that's really the goal. So like with Crash, we were taking something we had learned from Praxis, from years of helping people through this very intensive program, to go and get jobs that on paper they shouldn't be able to get. Jobs that say degree required plus 3 years of experience. People who are 19 and had no degree and no experience were getting hired for these jobs. And we learned that the reason they were getting hired was not only that they had the skills, which is necessary, but that they were capable of signaling their skills in a way that was superior to the signal of degree, 2 years of experience. Their competitors were listing those things and saying, because I have these, you can trust that I'll be good at the job. We were teaching people to say, because I already did the job before I got it, I created this project for you with 100 leads, and that's what I want to do on your sales team. And here's a video of me pitching you and a mock sales phone call. You see that and you're like, whoa, you have proved you're capable of the job. And that's a higher standard of proof than this degree. And so we learned this kind of be your own credential and proactively pitch companies, make projects for them. And we just saw how successful it was. So Crash, the idea was, hey, let's take that small slice of Praxis and let's put it on a platform where anybody anywhere who has the skills to get a job, but is not getting hired because they're just sending the same resume as everyone else, they can now do something more robust. They can use this tool to create beautiful video pitches, and they can manage their job hunt like a sales process. And so that was kind of the idea, was this sort of be your own credential. But we took it to the market with like knowing that we needed to learn a lot of things about where do various people enter, like how many people are ready to make a project in a video. And the people who are ready and able to do that are not always the people who are actively job hunting and trying to figure out like which segment do we go after? Do we make this more of a long-term preparation tool where you're building this body of work over time before you're job hunting? Do we make it more of a urgent, you're on the job hunt now tool? How easy do you make it, right? The easier you make it, the more users you get, but the easier you make it, the less distinguished it is from a traditional resume. And so these are all like really complicated, surprisingly complicated questions in a consumer product like this. And so, over the 18 months that Crash has been, out there, and it's mostly been in like versions of closed beta because we really wanted to control which users we had so we could get that feedback. We've changed and we've adapted it so many times. And it hasn't been, let's think about it, let's keep it hidden. When I say closed beta, like it's out there publicly, it just means that people have had to request access to the platform, and we usually give it to everybody right away. But so we've known we've got to get feedback from the world as quickly as possible to learn how to dial this thing in. And so we had an original version that was like, we had this kind of assumption that most people first need to learn this mindset before they can use a tool, which I think is true. But we assumed that learning the mindset meant we got to make them go through this course first, and then they can create these pitches and do all these things. And that was just too constraining to users. And because too many users come at different points. Like some people need to learn everything. Some people are ready to go now and everywhere in between. And so making everyone go through this track. So we sort of broke those things apart and said, okay, we have this supplementary content. If you want to learn how to create projects and things, you can. But if you want to just start doing it, you can. Then we kind of found that people were getting their profiles and pitches ready, but never publishing them because they were kind of scared. And so we thought, well, maybe we can incentivize that by making this more of a public event where the homepage is just a list of profiles by date. Hey, this is the newest one published. And you have like people can upvote them, and you kind of turn it into like a campaign. And there's some incentive to tap into people's desire to get upvotes and this sort of gamification for them to excitedly publish, and then it's public and whatever. And there was things about that worked really well that we learned, but there were things about it that it scared some people away. So we sort of went away from that model. And we also learned that asking people to create like a really robust profile with all sorts of things that they built and whatever, they all started there and they all felt very intimidated by it. And so they would often stop. They would just get halfway through and not finish. But the 80-20, right? The 80% of the results came from the 20% of people who are just creating really tight, tailored pitches for individual companies. Instead of trying to build one big giant profile of here's who I am, creating a small pitch with just a short video and a few projects, So we shifted the platform to focus more on pitching individual companies and less on making this one grandiose profile to go into this talent gallery. And that's been a big shift that's been really effective. But there's still some things that we've learned that like maybe we overcorrected. So it's been a crazy journey of trying to identify what works in terms of producing outcomes for customers, but also what works in terms of getting them to do the action. So that's the gap, right? Like if you could get every customer to jump over tons of hurdles, their outcomes would be 100% of them would get hired. It would be incredible. But that's too much work to ask of them. On the other extreme, if you did like most jobs board where it's like, just click apply with one button over and over and over again, millions of people would do it, but none of them would get hired because it's a really low bar. And so trying to find the balance between asking a lot of your customers and making things easy for your customers has really been what we've been exploring and experimenting this whole time. And like, we've done all kinds of stuff that we ended up discontinuing or that failed or that we don't even know if it failed because like we didn't properly test it. So, I mean, it's a wild process from the outside. And I fall into this too. When I look at other companies and startups, I'm like, man, they just have it all figured out. They do everything right. And I don't know how they did this. From the inside, it's nothing like that. You're always trying to figure out what the hell is going on.
That's fascinating. So to wrap up, I'd like to ask you two questions. One regarding young people's education and the other regarding young people's career development. So if you were to give just 2 or 3 pieces of advice for young people who are questioning whether to go to college or whether to go to Praxis or what to do for their education. They're getting out of high school and they know they need to learn more. What kind of advice would you give young people in that position?
Yeah, I think it's really important to know what you want and why. And that can be really hard to figure out, and it can be really hard to be honest about it. So, I will talk to some young people who will say, "Oh, I really don't want to go to college. It sounds boring, blah, 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 but I have to." And I'll start to probe a little bit and say, "Well, why do you have to?" "Well, because I got to get a job." And "Well, what job do you want?" "Well, I don't really know." "Well, how do you know that you need a degree if you don't even know what job?" Right? That's like going to the airport and being like, "Well, I have to buy a plane ticket to get where I want to go." And I said, "Where do you want to go?" "Well, I don't know, but I just have to get a plane ticket to get there." It's like, well, the ticket's not going to help you if you don't even know, right? And when you scratch a little bit, it often turns out the reasons people give for, saying they're going to go to college are often different than the actual reasons. If you really scratch, okay, well, what would happen if you didn't go? What if you tried to go out and figure out what kind of work you wanted to do first and figure out if college was even necessary? I mean, I've even talked to people who say, "Well, I want to be a marketer at a startup." And I've said, "I can get you that job right now today." Like I said, "Tell me a job that you hope to get when you graduate." And they would explain it. And I'd say, "I could get you that job in 6 months." And they would say, "Well, but I still got to go to college." And I'll say, "Oh, okay. So that really wasn't the reason. Well, why do you still have to go to college?" And it often turns out it's something like, "Because my mom will kill me. She's been saving up for this. It means too much to her." And I'm not even going to say whether that's good or bad, but I think being honest, and I've had some people be honest, it's rare, but they've said, "Look, I know college isn't going to help me get a job, but I want to party for 4 years and I want my parents to be happy." Okay, that's at least honest. You know why you're doing it, right? And that's so much better than to try to deceive yourself and to create myths and reasons about it. And this goes for anything. I mean, this could go for Praxis as well, right? Like you can do Praxis just because your parent really wants you to and you really don't want to and you don't know why the hell you're doing it, but you're telling yourself some story. So I would just tell people, like, you don't need to know what you want to do with your life, but when you look at the next 6 months, the next year, what's the best use of that time given your goals and interests? And if you say, my goal is really, I've been in high school for all this time, just to goof off. Okay, college may be a way to do that, but hell, you might be able to goof off for a lot cheaper and a lot more fun if you try some other things, right? Oh, it's to make as much money as I can. Okay, let's look at all the different ways you could do that, right? And I think it's just really important to clearly define what you're trying to get out of that next unit of time, whether it's 6 months or a couple years or 4 years. What are you hoping to have at the end of that? And what's the best possible way to get there or to increase the chances of that happening? And by the way, we ask people that when they apply to Praxis, or at least we did when I was there. I know it was part of the application process. Is okay, what is your goal? What do you want to have at the end of 12 months? And if they say something that's totally irrelevant to Praxis, it's like, well, at the end of 12 months, I hope to be selling my art, at art studios. Then I would say, well, how do you think Praxis is going to help increase the chances of that happen? And sometimes it's like, it's not. They're just looking for a holdover. And I'm like, well, it's probably not the program for you. But if what you want, the thing that you're doing next is very likely to increase the odds of that happening, you don't have to prove that it's going to be for sure, but then go do that. But if you have no clue, if it has no connection to your goals and interests, then like step back a second and try to get a little creative and think about what else you could do. So I think that's really important. And I think before you assume that you have certain goals, try to test them out. A lot of people say, well, I got to go to college because I want to be an accountant or a lawyer. And often those people have no idea if they actually want that thing. And so I'll often encourage them like, well, go job shadow for a week. Go volunteer at a law firm and see what those people do every day. And if that excites the shit out of you, I hope I can say that on here, then jump in and go for it. But otherwise, don't just assume that that's what you want to do because you have some idea of what that life is going to be like.
Yeah, it's interesting, that kind of knowledge, the knowledge of what does it actually mean to be in this career? Because so many people have this romanticized image of what it means to be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever. And today, being a doctor, you spend a huge amount of your time filling out forms for the government, right? I mean, so it's just like, it's not what, these careers are not necessarily what people make them out to be. And that just the advice to, be intentional. It was sort of seems to be the overarching point there. What do you want to do? And what would it take to get there? And do you really know that that's what you want to do? How do you know that? So I love that advice. Now, what would you say in terms, let's say somebody is out of his education. So maybe he's gone through Praxis or he's finished college or whatever. He's in the marketplace now trying to launch a career. What do you think are what would be your most fundamental pieces of advice for people in that situation?
Yeah, go deep, not broad. That's what I would say. Finding 5 companies, organizations, opportunities that are really interesting to you, that really get you excited, and spending some time, hours, longer if need be, getting to know researching them, learning about their products, their company, following their CEO or whoever else on Twitter, listening to any podcast interviews they've done, reading articles about them, really understanding them and putting something together unique just for them doing that 5 times is going to get you better results than clicking apply and attaching a resume 50 times easily. And it's a hard thing because people feel really stressed, like they have to play the numbers game. Like, okay, I got to apply to 5 jobs every day. And they'll do that for like 6 months and not get any results. And it's like, it's just, you think about the dating market. Are you more likely to not only get a date, but end up with a happy relationship if you go out to every bar you can find and just print off 100 pieces of paper that say, here are 10 reasons I'm highly dateable, and just start handing them out to everybody, give me a call, versus like go to some different social events and hangouts. You observe someone that's actually interesting to you. And then you say, hey, you're interesting to me. I like this and this about you. I would love to learn more and hang out. Let's go grab some coffee, right? It's the same with companies. Hey, you are really interesting to me. I would love to work with you. Let's talk more. Here's some examples of stuff that I've done. Here's what I love about your company. Let's see if there's any opportunity here. Doing that in a genuine way is 10 times better than, dear sir or madam, I have experience, give me a paycheck, which is what almost every job application is like. So I think that's really important to actually be excited about the company enough that you want to put in some time. I mean, you want to go work at, you want to work with Craig Biddle. Getting to know Craig's work and what he does and sending him something like, Craig, I'm a huge fan. This article you wrote in 2017 was one of my all-time favorites. I love what you're doing. I've seen this podcast. Here is a short 2-minute video where I made a montage of all the best clips of your last 3 episodes. You can use this in your marketing if you want. I would love to come on and do more of this as your marketing intern. I could run your Facebook page, your Twitter account, make one of these once a week, and anything else you have for me, let me know if you're interested in talking. I would be shocked, even if Craig isn't hiring, I'd be shocked if he didn't at least give you a phone call, right? And I think thinking that way about your career, your job hunt is like the best untold secret out there.
Yeah, you put that to me in my own terms toward my business and my context, and immediately in my mind, of course, I go, of course, if somebody did that, whether I was hiring or not, I'd want to meet that person, talk to him, and he'd certainly be on my list for the next time I was hiring, even if I wasn't hiring now. And I think if you ask any business owner or manager about that way, they would say the exact same thing. So listeners, if you're not familiar with Crash yet, this is precisely the kind of thing that Crash is set up to help you do, and to help you demonstrate that you can create value, so that you can engage with companies that you'd love to work at and show them that you can create value. And the effect of that, I can promise you as a business owner, is that that's precisely what we want to see. So I love that you're doing this stuff, Isaac, and it was really a joy to hear you talk about not only what you're doing now, but sort of how all of this came to be. It's a fascinating story, and to watch you not only teach people these ideas, but to see you using the very ideas that you teach as you move to the next phase of your professional career is just fascinating. So.
Hey, this has been a lot of fun. I only regret, this is one of my weaknesses, that I talk too much, that I didn't give both of you a little more chance to chat and ask questions.
No, we wanted you to talk, man. We just wanted to hear what you had to say about what you're up to. But we'd love to do this again another time, maybe take things from a different angle. And so let's make plans for that.
Sounds great.
Good deal.
Great to chat with you.
Thanks. Take care.
Isaac.
If you liked this episode of Philosophy for Flourishing, you'll love Craig's book, Loving Life, The Morality of Self-Interest and the Facts that Support It. We're actually giving this ebook away for free to our listeners. Just head over to objectivestandard.org/lovinglife and sign up to get a free copy of the ebook. objectivestandard.org/lovinglife. See you next week.